Yes, I mean, the epidemic does not recognize borders. It doesn't recognize differences in religion or political views. If Iran is in trouble, this is a danger not just for Iran, but for all the other countries around it. The epidemic is such that you can't really seal yourself off from the rest of the world. Yeah. It was never possible even in previous times in history. I mean, even in the Middle Ages, when you didn't have airplanes and trains, still epidemics like the Black Death spread over entire continents. So it's unrealistic to think that today a country can just completely isolate itself from other countries.
In the same way, then, does it mean that individuals, any individual, has to cede total authority to the state?
I wouldn't say total authority. I mean, this is when your trust in your state, your trust in your government is very important. Mm-hmm. If you live in a country where for years, for decades, the government has abused the trust of the citizens, then this is the payday. This is when the citizens don't believe the government, and maybe they shouldn't. And it's the same also on the global level. We need today leaders on a global level, and if for years we have been eroding trust internationally, then today is payday. Today we need this trust, and it's gone.
If you say, and it's certainly the case, that trust in institutions, trust in politicians has been eroding, is this the way in which we might restore trust in those authority figures?
If they act in a wise way, then certainly. It's often said that every crisis is also an opportunity, and this could be an opportunity for governments to win back the trust of their citizens, but it's going to be difficult because of the abuse of the trust in recent years.
Is it possible that it will exacerbate fault lines between the haves and the have-not, the healthy and the unhealthy? Or do you think this might actually make us kinder humans?
It's our choice. You know, the options are always there. But I don't think that anything is inevitable here. It's not inevitable that an epidemic leads to the rise of totalitarianism, but it is a possibility. At present, though, I'm more concerned about the lack of trust, especially globally, internationally, than about the threat of too much trust or too much power to a single government. We need to differentiate between the level of a single country and the level of the international system. On the level of a single country, I think that the rise of totalitarianism might be, or a boost to totalitarianism may be a real danger. On the international level, it's the opposite. If you look, for example, at the United States, and you compare the role of the US 10 years ago in dealing with the 2008 financial crisis to what's happening now, today no country is really willing to follow the leadership of the US because you don't follow a leader whose motto is me first. And we are now facing a real crisis because of that on the international level.
So do you think this is going to have, no matter what, a big impact on globalization? Do you think, though, that we're going to become more protectionist?
It could be, though I think it's the wrong conclusion. You cannot defend yourself from an epidemic like this by becoming more closed. You need to be more open. Again, if you really think you can protect yourself from the spread of epidemics by sealing your border, you should remember that even in the Middle Ages, as I said before, epidemics spread when borders were much more difficult to cross. When you had no airplanes and no trains and no fast cars, you still had the Black Death. If you really want to seal yourself off, you don't need to be medieval. You need to go back to the Stone Age. And this is something nobody's going to do. The real antidote is to have closer global cooperation so countries can share information more efficiently. they can learn from the experience of the first victims, they can trust each other, and most importantly, they can help each other. This, I think, should be the real lesson from this epidemic, that no country can protect itself just by its own efforts.
Yuval Noah Harari, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, I'm joined now by Rebecca Rideal, a historian of disease and author of 1666, Plague, War and Hellfire. Good evening. Rebecca, in your experience as a historian, looking back at different outbreaks, and we're not, of course, saying anything about the coronavirus being anything like the Spanish pandemic or anything, do people generally come together, or do they retreat into their own tribes?
It's a really interesting question, and obviously there are complex answers to that, because it depends on the disease, the understanding of the disease, and who who's suffering from that disease at that moment in time. I think historically we've recognised that there is a tendency to other certain groups within society, and that's a risk with all pandemics and diseases.
For example, in what particular outbreaks of disease?
Well, we've seen it in the 20th century with the AIDS pandemic.
It used to be called the gay plague.
Exactly, and you see the way that people can become stigmatised by a disease, and it's very, very dangerous and creates a whole host of other problems for those people that are under the microscope, so to speak.
And in previous centuries, when there was a Dutch outbreak, what happened there?
So during the Great Plague of 1665, and obviously coronavirus isn't the Great Plague, but we do see this rhetoric, which is concerning anyway. But during the Great Plague of 1665, it was very much linked with the Dutch, because it was thought to have, and it probably did travel via transport ships and merchant ships to England, but it probably did that in various waves, and plague was endemic within the country anyway during that century. But this attachment to a group of people provokes other things as well.
So as we're talking about behavioural science before, so it's a fine line between calling people out on behaviour that could perhaps spread the virus and actually stigmatising people.
I think there's a very fine line. It's incredibly dangerous as well at times.
And do you think that for the future historian will look back on this and find this as a sort of seminal moment where we change our attitude to each other in society?
Well, I think it would be irresponsible for a historian to talk about the future. But what I would say is that I think after this outbreak, and perhaps, however it progresses over the next few months or potentially a year or so, we will see authorities and in different countries looking at the way that they approached the virus and whether that was fit for purpose, and what room there is for improvement and comparisons across borders and things.
Thank you very much indeed.